story today about the movement that we're a part of, that we're writing the next chapter of today, that the movement is facing up to the coal industry that's tearing apart our land, tearing apart our reef, tearing apart our regional and coastal communities, and bringing justice to the climate and the catastrophe that is facing us if we don't do something now. These people, like you, all over Australia are ordinary people that have realised that leaders aren't listening anymore and realise that it's up to them. It's up to them to stand up.
Right.
I remember when I first started to realise that our leaders weren't listening, when I was 17 years old, and I was just learning about climate change in school. And at this time, the parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere was around 380 parts per million. And scientists were saying at that point that unless we do something now, it's going to get up to 400 parts per million, and we're going to start to go beyond the level of carbon in the atmosphere that will accelerate climate change beyond our control. And then just last week I was sitting at my computer and I got an email, and what do you know? The parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere has started averaging around 400 parts per million. And it just felt like time had become a blur. That, wow, there's 3 years and still going up. What are we doing? And you can probably relate to that feeling. And that's when I realised that, you know, it's what Bill McKibben will tell you when he comes here, is it's too late to stop climate change. It's now about stopping it becoming a catastrophe. It's about stopping the worst impacts from changing a civilization that we can enjoy, that we can share with the rest of the world, into a civilization that is unimaginable. And so, if you truly believe that science and feel like you understand it enough to base your life on what it's saying is going to happen, there's only one question you can ask, and that's, what do you do? And that's the question that we will judge ourselves on when we're old. When we're in our older years and we've watched what's happened to this planet, we've watched what's happened to our society, that will be the question we ask ourselves. So I was lucky enough to be reminded of that question from a young age. I grew up surrounded by people trying to create a sustainable future in the Northern Rivers. Indoctrinated from birth, some might say, but another local town in which I grew up actually had the first solar panel shop in Australia. It wasn't a solar, it was a run on rainbow power actually. Can anyone guess where that is? It was Nimbin. The hippies have been right all along. But growing up in Rainbow Land, I still developed a healthy scepticism and rebellious nature towards my parents and all the people that were trying to change the world. And I was still a white blonde kid strutting around in gangster Wu-Tang clothes at the skating rink on a Friday night. And until one day when I was about 17 and I realised that the impacts were already taking place, and I noticed that the land was starting to change, the drought was having a big impact at that time, and that the very colourful fish I'd cynically named the hippie fish at the local bit of reef that we had was gone, wasn't there anymore. And so after this realisation I managed to chuck all my clothes in a fire, Wu-Tang clothes, burn them, then feel guilty about burning them. It's all emissions, of course. And then find myself down in Sydney on the edge of the Opera House with 2,000 other young people dancing for action on climate change. And that's when I felt that we're actually part of a movement that can change things. That was PowerShift 2009. And just another plug for PowerShift in Melbourne this year if you get a chance to go down. If you want that feeling that you're part of a movement that can change things, that's where you're going to get it more than anywhere else. So from there, fast forward, I was running around the country with AYCC for a couple of years, and I started hearing about coal expansion. We were very much focused on trying to communicate this vision that we could create a renewable energy future. People like a positive vision, but at the same time, creeping up behind our backs was the problem, and that problem was getting bigger and bigger. And that was coal expansion and the proposed expansion in New South Wales, Queensland and all over Australia, and gas. And I watched the premiere of Bimblebox about a massive mine that Clyde Palmer wants to build in the Galilee Basin. And it really started to make me realise what the impacts would be for our climate and our reef if these coal ports went ahead. And so I realised that it's up to us to decide whether we allow these coal-crazy, fossil-full cowboys to build a emission export highway across the most beautiful symbol of life on Earth and all its magnificence. Only we will decide that.
Yeah.
If all the mines in Queensland go ahead, Queensland will be the second biggest source of carbon in the world.
Right.
Only the coal province in Western China will eclipse the amount of emissions that will be created by the 760 million tonnes per annum that is currently proposed from the combined coal mines that will go through all the coal ports. So after coming to grips with this, I found out more about Bimblebox and chased up Ellie Smith, an amazing activist and producer of that film who was living up in Mackay, and decided to get up there to help her out to try and stop one of the coal terminals, the Dudgeon Point Coal Terminal. It's the second biggest port proposal after Abbott Point, and it will be 180 million tonnes per annum if it goes ahead. So I got up to Mackay and suited myself out so I try and fit in, and I found out everyone actually wears high vis because they're all in the mines. But I realised after moving up there that this issue is so much more complicated than I thought. It's not just a climate issue, it's a social justice issue because people live near these ports. It's a health issue because people are having to breathe in coal dust. It's a fishing issue because commercial fishers are going to lose the fishing areas that they rely on for their business. It's an economic issue because these industries are getting so big that they're squeezing out the agricultural, manufacturing and tourism industry, and there's going to be nothing left when the coal boom ends. So to realise this has been a hard thing to swallow for a lot of North Queenslanders because Mackay is a town that has been brought so much wealth and growth from the coal industry, and that's what everything's about these days, it seems, isn't it? Growth. But it's also brought a lot of inequality. People can't afford to live there anymore. A lack of infrastructure that has just been totally run over by the growth from the coal industry and all the trucks, a lack of services, and a loss of the beautiful natural environment and the community values that you have when you have a country town, not a coal city. So locals and even coal miners are beginning to question what's going on, and they're saying enough is enough. They can see through the smog. The campaign that has been started around Mackay has turned people worried about the impacts of the coal port, but disempowered by 30 years of coal industry propaganda into people empowered and ready to take action. They're leading the way to hold our politicians accountable and to demand change. So as you know, Dudgeon Point is one of the 6 coal terminals. We've got a lot on our hands. There's another 2 proposals for ports that aren't yet formal at Bundaberg and Townsville, so it could be 8 if we're not careful. So what's going on the coast is absolute madness. But these communities are standing up. They're standing up to the dredging, they're standing up to new ships, they're standing up to the coal dust that's going to affect the communities, they're standing up for their reef, their communities and their future. And that's what they need your help with. People that live less than a kilometre from these ports are feeling pretty despaired about what they can do about it. But if people all over Australia and people in Brisbane really start to raise their voices, that's what's going to make all the difference. The Federal Environment Minister Tony Burke needs to be told that these new coal ports cannot go ahead. This is where we all need to work together. Telling Tony Burke by any means possible, now through the election, whoever the next government is, we need to tell them as well, but we need to do it with outrage. By putting pressure on them, we can get them to preserve the greatest living treasure our planet has. The recent stoppage of the Kimberley gas hub shows that we can do it. We've done it before, we can do it again, and we can protect what's going to matter in the future. So against us, and trying to convince them otherwise, we have the fossil fuel industry. I believe by design, the corporations are insane in their structure. They burn fossil fuels to profit from that, and it's wrecking the climate. It's wrong to wreck the climate, and it's wrong to profit from that wreckage. We're currently subsidising those industries that destroy our reef, destroy our future, and most of all destroy our climate, which is going to destroy our generation's quality of life as we go forward. It's intergenerational war. There's no way I can describe it any simpler. And that may sound a little extreme, but we must remember that we've got it pretty easy now. Our parents didn't have it this easy, their parents didn't have it this easy. And if what happens that's expected to happen, it is. That's exactly what it is. And that we may know people that seem to think climate change is something that's going to affect our children's children, but they need to know that what happens in Queensland over the next 2 years will impact all of our lives directly, harshly, and with an unforgiving power that will turn our world upside down. We are fighting for our generation's future. So by being here today, I hope you're starting to think about being part of this struggle, because it's going to be a long struggle. The biggest industry in the world is going to take more than a campaign or a bit of help on the weekends to stop from destroying the reef and destroying our climate. The reality is, in the end, the political movements that win are the ones with the most amount of effective activists that can deliver that message to Tony Burke, that deliver that message out into the community. Unless we have as many people as possible doing that, making it a priority, we won't win. So it's up to us. It's only up to us. It's up to us, our families, our friends, our communities and our networks, whether we're going to stand up. And AYCC needs you, and we need to do this for our generation. So I ask you to make sure you keep with it, keep safe, keep sustainable, so you can be in it for the long run, because the brightest candle sometimes burns out fastest. We want these candles to go for a long time. And afterwards, if you're ever in Mackay, drop me a line and we can go snorkel on the reef where the coal ports could have been built. Thank you.